Hi, I'm Chris Caligari. Now, you don't have to break it to me gently. I'm not on here just purely for eye candy. I'm no George Clooney. Also, I'm not going to disguise my aged appearance by wearing a hat and sunglasses like some old pop stars do, or even donning a wig. I think that makes me look ridiculous. Now, what I'm on here for is a vitally important message, so therefore I would be really grateful if you'd stick with me for a few minutes and see if you think what I'm saying makes sense. Now, most channels on here on YouTube, they tend to be talking about ways of helping wildlife. My approach is slightly different because the ways that are being suggested are nothing like fundamental enough. We've been watching our wildlife decline for decades, and as a garden designer since the early 1990s, I'm now retired, it's absolutely abundantly clear to me that what we're doing is nothing like enough. So if you have a garden, you might feed the birds, which is excellent. You might put up nest boxes, also good. But the mistake which is frequently made is a really devastating one for wildlife, because the emphasis tends to be on nectar-rich planting and thinking that that too is helping wildlife. Now, I come from a long line of gardeners. I consider myself an avid gardener. But I've recognised that if we're going to halt our decline in wildlife, our approach needs to be totally different. And I do mean totally and fundamentally different. The emphasis on nectar-rich flowers, which do help wildlife, but it's nothing like enough. So I'm here with the blunt truth that what we are doing is not helping wildlife, and our wildlife will continue to decline unless we make radical changes. What are these radical changes? To make a real difference, we must stop tinkering around at the edges. I've touched on bird feeding, I've touched on nest boxes, perhaps you've got a pond. These things are all excellent things to do, but on their own, they're nothing like enough. Can I give you an example? If, let us imagine, we put ourselves in the midst of a huge airport car park. Okay, we can all agree that the biodiversity, the amount of wildlife in that car park is nil or virtually nil. Okay, we might get some lichens, we might get some bacteria, but it's virtually nil. Now, our gardens, and popular though it might be to say so, are broadly similar. If our gardens are full of garden plants, at best it is a feeding station. But what we're not doing is enabling our wildlife to thrive. So we take our huge car park. Don't be offended, don't switch off, don't be offended. I promise you there's a good point to this. But if we imagine our car park, let's say it's got cars in it, virtually no wildlife. Then we imagine that we buy at large, vast expense, half a dozen mature buddleias, pot grown. We wheel those in on the back of a tractor. We park them in the middle of this car park. We will get butterflies, we will get bees. But the fundamental, essential question is, have we actually helped the wildlife? We provided them with a temporary feeding station, equivalent of perhaps our herbaceous border, but we haven't given our wildlife anywhere to live. So if we were to say, oh yes, we brought these buddleia in, we've increased the biodiversity of the garden, I can see butterflies, I can see bees, I can see bumblebees, I can see hoverflies, we perhaps rack off 30 species, but what we haven't done is the essential bit. We haven't improved the biodiversity of that car park. It's the same with our gardens. If we tinker around with our gardens and we continue to manage them tightly as we do, then we're not going to reverse the downward trend in wildlife, because we're not doing what we need to do so urgently. We're not providing habitats, we're not providing places where that wildlife can live. We therefore need to release our stranglehold on our land. I'm talking about gardens, but we could equally well talk about our verges, our churchyards, any space for which we have any responsibility. We need to release our stranglehold, not try and cultivate them and keep them tidy. Tidiness is a tremendous killer of wildlife and really is responsible, in my opinion, for a vast amount of the decline in our wildlife. And we could reverse it, and we could do it so easily. So what we need to do is have spaces where wildlife is left to its own devices. Some people refer to it as rewilding. It's not rewilding. It's leaving spaces where wildlife can exist. Close mowing, lawns. I won't say they're of no value, but they're not going to support the wildlife. They can't actually live there. And if we could break the myth that providing nectar-rich flower borders is in some way a panacea, is very helpful to wildlife, it may be pretty to look at, but it is really not the answer. So we need to create areas in our garden which we do not cultivate, which we do not mow, and we let nature have its head. Now, I've produced several videos where I go into detail in some of the things that we can do, and I'd be most grateful if you'd have a look at those. But the thrust of this video is to take the bull by the horns and say, we need to make huge changes, and we need to make them now. And those changes in our attitude to how we manage our spaces, and particularly our gardens. Let me return for 1 second to the buddleia. Now, our buddleias in the car park, they represent a feeding opportunity, but it's really not very similar. It's not very dissimilar, rather, to a herbaceous border. Now, I see many garden experts who advocate, this is on television, on YouTube, all over the place, who advocate the planting of nectar-rich plants as if it is some sort of panacea, and by producing a feeding opportunity, such as a flower-rich herbaceous border, they think they're helping wildlife. Well, they are to a certain extent, but it's nothing like enough. Now, I know, as you would imagine, as a gardener designer from the early 90s, I've now retired, most gardeners are also passionate about wildlife, but they're making a fundamental error in thinking that they can reverse the downward trend in wildlife by planting more garden plants. What is needed is places for animals to live. Now, other videos which I produced, they cover the nuts and bolts of how to do that. But the biggest change is to persuade gardeners and anybody with a responsibility for land to not manage tightly, to let areas be wild. If we think about bats, for example, we can't very easily feed bats directly, but we can feed them and do an awful lot of good if we have areas of our garden where we have long grass. Not just for a while, but permanently. Because in the long grass, you get an awful lot of moths, moth caterpillars. And therefore, you'll be supplying or providing a source of moths, which of course are essential to the bats. Ponds, if you have one, are also great. Ponds without fish, ideally. But the fact that we need a garden which is full of native plants, that is where we're really doing some good. We don't want to be thinking too much necessarily about flower-rich pictures in our mind, because that's really not what we should be driving at. What we need are patches of vegetation, because the caterpillars are essential for our butterflies. So, our buddleia, yes, we may very well like to see the red admirals, the peacocks, the commas and all the rest of it. And they will visit the buddleia, they will visit our herbaceous borders, the many wasps, the hoverflies. But that's only a feeding opportunity, and what we're not doing is providing them places to live. And so therefore, the message that I want to drive in this video is that we need to not cultivate, not mow, and we need areas which are left to be wild, to be, as traditionalists would call it, untidy. Untidiness is going to make a huge difference for our wildlife. If we want bats, we need places where their insect food can live. And that's not going to be provided by rich flower sources. As a supplementary feeding opportunity, great, but that's not enough. Many gardeners are passionate about wildlife, but wildlife absolutely needs wild areas. You can do something about this right away. We have loads of talk about climate change, but really it's very difficult for us as individuals to have an immediate impact on that. But for wildlife in your area, you have the opportunity to make a huge difference virtually overnight. If we can change the way that we think about our gardens, the way we think about our open spaces. We allow dead wood, either on the ground in the form of log piles, which will rot, which will provide food for a host of living things. Dead wood on trees. If we have native trees especially, they have been existing for millions of years and have learnt to cope with dead wood. If we look around us, we can see many examples where dead wood is not tolerated. We have to break away from the mould of tidiness and conventional gardening. Then we can turn things around. Now, I don't have to go far from my house to be able to pick out examples where things are going so badly wrong and people are doing things misguidedly. They think they're doing it for the best and they have a conventional way of thinking, but we need to change that. From the position where I'm sat now, through my office window, I can see a tree which has been tidied. It was in the way. Just up the road, a magnificent oak tree, but just look at what has been done to it. It has been deemed necessary to cut the dead wood from that oak tree. Now that is a huge, huge pity. Not only visually has it spoilt the look of the oak tree, which may eventually recover, but if we care about woodpeckers, tree creepers, if we care about a myriad of insects, that dead wood is absolutely essential. And tidiness absolutely murders our biodiversity. I'm not overstating it. a matter of yards from my house, a magnificent bank which was thriving with wildlife, but look at what has been done to it. Is it tidy? Yes. Is it horrendous for wildlife? Absolutely, most certainly. Again, in a different direction, within a short distance of my house, a householder who has several acres of pasture land. They don't, frankly, I believe, know what to do with it, and so they close mow it. Now that close mowing has removed it as an opportunity for wildlife for a multitude of organisms. It has devastated the wildlife of that area. Are they bad people? No. Are they misguided? Absolutely. This is where we're going wrong. A churchyard close to me. Is it tidy? Oh yes. Yes. Is it good for wildlife? No. Frankly, it is a nightmare for wildlife. It used to be great for wildlife, but then it has come under new management. It is regularly mowed. The standing dead elms, which were small, not a danger, have been removed. The anthills, which had been there for many decades, were in the way of the mower. They've been removed. The green woodpeckers, that was a favourite haunt of theirs. The owls that live in the churchyard, what are they supposed to feed on? The mammals, the small mammals, which of course were a staple, the young grass snakes, the slowworms, which were a staple part of their food, their habitat has been removed, the place where they live. The wildlife has been devastated. You may think I'm passionate about this. No, I admit I am. I'm on here. I'm no George Clooney. You haven't been watching this video and treating me as a bit of eye candy. I don't think that's very likely. The message is absolutely essential that we stop being tidy, because it is within our power to make a huge difference, and to make that difference virtually overnight. I'm not on here for fame. I think I've had my 15 minutes of fame or whatever as a garden designer back in the day. I'm not on here to make money. I'm not on here for any reason apart from, I hope, to try and persuade people, for the benefit of wildlife, to change our strategy in gardens and to stop thinking that bird feeding, nectar-rich plants, putting a pond in, putting nest boxes in, is enough. The message has to be blunt. It has to be direct. It is not enough. We must release our stranglehold in the form of gardens and all other open spaces, provide habitats where creatures can live. Then we will make a real difference. You may think this is something of a rant. It is. Do I make an apology for it? I can't, because our wildlife has been declining for decades. It is not getting better, nor will it get better, unless we make the changes, and we do them now. Our wildlife can't wait. It must happen now. If I can persuade you, that's great. It could be that you already agree with me. Thank heavens for that, because it's only the knowledge that there are people out there of the same way of thinking that keeps me sane. But even if you are of this way of thinking, I would be grateful, but our wildlife would be forever grateful, if you could spread the word, either through your own words or actions, or perhaps by sharing my videos. I can't apologise for the rant. Thank you ever so much for watching, and if you'd be kind enough to press the like button, that would be excellent. If you would subscribe, even better, all in the cause of wildlife. And if you could share it with those that perhaps share my point of view, our point of view, or who don't yet, then it will be invaluable. Thanks ever so much for watching. I hope to see you in another of my videos. See you soon. Bye.